Good day, everyone. My name is David Williams, Executive Director of the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Managing Carbon, Growing Economies, Leveraging Gas, Liquids, and Infrastructure in the Energy Transition. We're grateful to our moderator, Dr. Paula Gant from GTI, and our distinguished panelists for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iae.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for our panelists, please use Zoom's Q&A option at the bottom of your Zoom window to make known your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of this webinar to address your questions. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator, Dr. Paula Gant, responsible for strategy and innovation at GTI. IAEE also wishes to thank GTI for co-sponsoring this webinar with us today. Paula, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Rebecca, for organizing us for this event today. I really appreciate everyone that's online for taking some time to share your day with us as we grapple with some of the big questions and opportunities that are involved in energy systems transitions. Today in our discussion, we're going to focus on the role of gases in energy transition, in particularly how infrastructure is going to be helpful in these transitions that we're all about. I have the pleasure of hosting Erin Blanton of Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs and the Global Center for Energy Policy. Yes, that's all one title. And at the opposite end of the spectrum for the shortest title, also have the pleasure of hosting Marion Lacombe from GRT Gas. So very pleased to have both of these bright minds here with us today. Erin's going to share highlights from her recent analysis on the role of gas systems in accelerating the transition to low carbon future here in the US. And Marion is going to share GRT Gas's strategy and planned pathways to meet really aggressive and impressive European decarbonization goals, with an emphasis on integrating biomethane and hydrogen, as well as leveraging existing gas infrastructure. She's also going to share with us the latest plans for the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, which is really exciting and visionary. But before we dive in, I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and zoom us out a little bit in our focus to focus on some of the big picture goals for clean energy transitions. And I think it's really important when we're trying to solve complex problems to first really get clear about what we're trying to achieve. And at GTI, when we look out to mid-century, we envision success in energy transition manifest as affordable, reliable, safe, and efficient energy systems that are also low carbon, secure, and resilient. All of these performance characteristics are required to meet the needs of local communities around the globe. And we must include those communities in the plans and actions needed for these transitions. At GTI, we've challenged ourselves to rethink the false choice presented by jobs versus an environment. Both are possible. We can have well-paying jobs and we can have a healthy environment. And that's possible because of innovation and disruptive innovation, as well as a very strong attention to integrating high quality jobs and training into our decarbonization efforts and bringing communities along as we do this. And the research is proving this up. We know that as we look to mid-century, achieving economy-wide deep decarbonization is going to require that we expand our energy infrastructure. It was also going to require a tremendous amount of investment in physical and human capital. And we expect that to result in tens of millions of jobs and tens of trillions of dollars in revenue investments. This is recent analysis by IRENA and the National Academy of Sciences points us to. In fact, this is a core component of the dual imperative we face. We have to deeply decarbonize these economies while also raising standards of living for communities around the globe. And therefore, we need to have a focus on mid-century as a significant strategic target and a major turning point, not just environmentally, but also for our physical assets and jobs and communities. We have to focus on leveraging the physical assets and capital and people that we have now so that we can leverage them in making these transitions. This is what we're solving for: clean energy systems that are reliable, affordable, resilient, secure, that support the communities that rely on them. So that's the big picture. And I'd like to then now turn to hearing from two of the brightest minds I know in thinking about how we're going to get started and leveraging what we have. First, we're going to hear from Erin Blanton, and then next we're going to hear from Marion Lacombe. Erin, over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paula, and for this opportunity to present. I will start here. Just as you noted, this was the recent research that we put out at the center, myself along with Melissa Lott and Kirsten Nicole Smith. And the reason that we actually wanted to look at this topic was in really touching on what you were talking about, was the way that the discussion was getting framed around our existing natural gas network and using the terminology. We kept hearing terminology about, will these be stranded assets? Why should we be investing in them if they're going to become stranded assets? If we invest in them, it's locking in a fossil fuel future. Any investment in the gas infrastructure is taking away from electrification, and that's where the focus would be. But we sort of saw, we wanted to reframe this, and really, I know this is in line with obviously the way that GTI is approaching the solution, is we have to make these enormous investments, as you noted, in infrastructure, and the lead times and financing, all of these are going to be challenges. And yet the natural gas system and all our scenarios are forecasting big build-outs, but the natural gas system, we already have it in place. It's already financed, it's already permitted, financed, and built. And so therefore, for us to not use it, to think about it as a tool in getting to net zero, felt like it would become an impossible task, because here is something that is in existence. So how can we harness it? How can we make it as compatible as possible? And instead of viewing it as this choice of, well, if we invest in it, it's a lock-in of fossil fuels, to shift it as, we have increasingly green electrons that are going to move over our electric grid. Let's start thinking about having increasingly green molecules that flow through the US gas grid. And that's where that's the eventual, our endpoint is the same. We all want net zero by 2050. We all want to decarbonize. We believe that this system is inherent to being able to get there. And one of the things we did in the paper was we also looked at the reality of what is the use of this system going to be, even from natural gas. So first looking at what are the projections for natural gas use within the United States. And in just about every scenario, we took EIA, IEA, we looked through them all. There is still significant gas that will be in our system even by 2040, 2050. And that's just in the most decarbonizing scenarios. You cannot get to net zero without still having a significant amount of natural gas in the system. And so with that, obviously, is a lot of CCUS or CCS, and therefore we really should be thinking about how do we, knowing that we're going to have a lot of gas in the system, now think about decarbonization, and let that be the focus of what do we do with the gas. It's very hard to replace those molecules, so let's start approaching this from that perspective. The other thing we looked at was the investment that's going in, because not only is this a network that is 2.5 million miles long, resilient, has high deliverability, services millions of tens of millions of end users, but it's one in which we've invested huge amounts of dollars and are continuing to make huge amounts of investments in. And the other thing we wanted to focus on was, where's the investment going? Because so much of the media attention is on the big transmission projects, these big interstate projects we have in the United States. But what's been driving the investment, or what makes up the majority of the investment in this industry, is on the distribution side. And that's either mandated expenses such as replacement of old pipelines, reliability expenses like remote control, that metering, and then the other one is new customers. And I think that was another thing that we wanted to make clear was, one, the system is continuing to have actually already a lot of investment going into it. It's inherently valuable. It's continuing to get more valuable, but new customers are a big driver. So when we looked at what's actually been happening on the ground, rather than just news about gas bans or bans of gas bans, what's actually happening at the customer level. And we realized that, we've added over 11 million customers since 2000. On average, between commercial users and residential users, the US increases by over 500,000 additional end users every single year. And that's a lot, driven a lot also by customer preference. So if we're really, if we're talking about decarbonizing and electrification, there has to be an acceptance that there is continuing customer preference for natural gas. And so something has to be done that addresses that customer preference, or creates incentives for, if you really want to do electrification, that creates incentives to shift that. But on the ground, this is what's seeing, and that trend has not gone away at any point, over the last 2 decades. It continues to go up. The sort of second part of our paper was saying, okay, look, as if we want to get to net zero by 2050, we're going to have these other fuels that go through, these lower carbon fuels that go through. And what to us seemed as a good synergy is, we know we need a lot more investment in hydrogen production. We know we need a lot more research and development about how we can increase hydrogen production and use in our economy. The Europeans are obviously very, very ahead of us in terms of thinking about this. So I won't go too far into it. But one of the things, we noted was, one of the ways we can scale up hydrogen use is by putting it in an existing system, rather than waiting to build an entirely new system. And it is also not economical to truck hydrogen. So the pipeline system we have in place is not only already advantageous by the fact it exists, but it is a good vehicle for us to increase hydrogen in our system and get it around our economy. And we looked at the prices of hydrogen and the costs in the US of hydrogen production, gray, blue, and green. And it is still considerably higher priced than natural gas, and it will take a while for that to come down. But we viewed that as, that gives us time. It gives us time to put in the R&D and the research, places like GTI, to figure out how compatible is hydrogen up to what blending ratio? How do we get in? What parts of our system can be most easily adapted for that? And then there was good news that we're seeing too, with, about hydrogen's compatibility and leak rates, not being that much different in distribution lines and PE, blended, certain PE pipes being pretty compatible. So there's some good news that we're already seeing, and that to us gave us even further incentive to say, this is a system that really could see a fair amount of hydrogen production by that 2050 timeline. And the way to do it is to keep the investment now, put the investment in now, when the volumes of natural gas, like we have 34 TCF a day, it's a huge volume of natural gas going through the system that in fact makes these retrofits and replacements and upgrades easier to sort of go out through the system, right, to be shared across the system. Those costs, that massive investment that we saw every year that's going in, is being there, sort of spread over, this 34 TCF a day of natural gas that's flowing too. So this, to us, it felt like the opportunity is now. And then I'll just end with some of the final part of our paper was really saying, hey, policymakers, not only changing the way they're thinking about this system, and instead of feeling like they're backed into a corner of locking in fossil fuels, that this is an opportunity. And the reality on the ground, as we said, is natural gas isn't going to go out of our system anytime soon. But was to sort of think about how do we create a more environmentally sound system now? How do we improve leak rates, pipeline replacement programs, make those existing make the existing network as low emissions as possible, because it's going to be with us for a long time. And then to think about the ways that we can really enhance those low carbon fuels going through our system, putting the R&D in about to figure out how hydrogen can be more compatible, blending rates. These are things that policymakers should really, can really be thinking about and putting into place. So I will end there, but that was sort of the way that we structured our research, and there we are.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. This work, I should point out that Erin and her co-authors have done at Columbia, I think, is a really important cornerstone in us beginning to map out the potential for transitioning the US and North American pipeline infrastructure to cleaner molecules and lower carbon molecules over the coming decades. So really appreciate the work that you've mapped out here in the US. And then that leads us to look across the pond to see how our European counterparts, with a similar starting point, a really robust natural gas transmission, storage, and delivery infrastructure, but they are a bit out of the starting gates ahead of us. And Marion is one of the minds that is really mapping out how that's going to happen and working to activate on those plans for transitioning that infrastructure. So very excited to hear the perspective from GRT Gas. Marion, up to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I share my screen. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much to invite me to this webinar and to give me the opportunity to share with you the vision of a European gas transport operator. So maybe in a few words about GRT Gas, to give you a short overview. So we are a European gas transport operator, and we operate around 32,000 kilometers of high pressure gas pipelines. And we transport through our network around 650 terawatt hour per year. As you see on this map, we place a key role in the European gas infrastructure scene, as we are strongly interconnected with other gas network in Europe. We are interconnected with Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, and Spain through the southwest of France. And last important thing is that we have a research center, RISE, Research for Innovation Center for Energy, and which is strongly involved in preparing our network to the integration of renewable and low carbon gases. So now, what about decarbonization and the development of hydrogen market in Europe, and what impact for a gas transport operator like GRT Gas? Well, as you probably know, the European Union has set clear long-term climate and energy goals with an ambition of climate neutrality by 2050. And in France, we also adopted the national low carbon strategy, which sets the French energy policy framework to achieve also carbon neutrality by 2050. And then these climate neutral objectives were completed both in Europe and in France and in several other European countries with dedicated hydrogen strategies. And to summarize, all these national strategies see renewable hydrogen as a key priority to achieve a clean energy transition. And these strategies also set the main priorities for the development of the hydrogen market. And first target is that renewable hydrogen should replace fossil fuels in some carbon intensive industrial processes, like in the steel sector, in the chemical sectors. And second, it should also offer solutions for hard to abate parts of the transport system, like the heavy duty transport, for example. And here on this map, you can see the different objectives in the European countries to install electrolyzer capacity by 2030. So there is a global, very ambitious target to achieve in Europe on this hydrogen market. So now in this political framework, as GRTgaz, we strongly believe that hydrogen and biomethane will play a major role in combination with renewable electricity to achieve this target of net zero emission in an affordable and socially acceptable way. And especially, we are convinced that the existing gas network, which is very well developed in Europe and interconnected, can facilitate the development of these renewable and low carbon gases. And so our commitment is to maximize the development of all these renewable and low carbon gases and the integration in our gas networks. And see here on this graph, you see our vision on how the French gas market could evolve to a low carbon gas market with a progressive increase of biomethane produced and consumed in France, and completed with other low carbon gases and with hydrogen from power to gas production. So now if I try to summarize our strategic direction on hydrogen today, I would say that in the short term, we are working to integrate hydrogen blended into the natural gas network. This would be the first step. But in the same time, we are anticipating the development of dedicated hydrogen networks in the medium term. And at the end, we really project GRTgaz to be both a natural gas operator and a hydrogen transport operator. So where do we stand now? As I said, we already are preparing our infrastructure to hydrogen. And one of the reasons is that we are already facing first requests from hydrogen production projects to inject into our grid. And at the end of 2020, we received more than 30 requests from different stakeholders to inject hydrogen or synthetic methane into our networks. And as a consequence, we prepare our network to operate hydrogen blended in the network with, for example, this project Jupiter 1000 project, which is a first demonstrator where we have two electrolyzers injecting into our gas network. And so it's a way to test in real condition the injection in our network, and we do that in close cooperation with the final users that are impacted. And very, very briefly, we also have a complete R&D program on hydrogen carried out by our research center. And this program deals with all the technical aspects, safety, gas quality. And right now we are building operational test benches to achieve our R&D program. But on a longer term, as I said, we believe that large-scale hydrogen consumption, as foreseen by the European Union, will require a well-developed hydrogen transport infrastructure. I would say that blending makes sense when hydrogen volumes are small and to facilitate the first projects. So it will be important in the coming years. But in a longer term, when hydrogen volumes will increase, there will be a need for dedicated hydrogen transport, as hydrogen production close to the consumption will not always be the most efficient solution to supply this consumption. And for instance, in cases where hydrogen consumers are located away from a large supply of renewable electricity or carbon storage locations, then having access to existing gas grids will be a cost-effective solution to receive hydrogen through the gas grid. So last year, with a group of European gas transmission system operators sharing the same vision, we launched this European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, and we drafted a proposal for a dedicated hydrogen pipeline infrastructure in Europe. And this infrastructure would be, to a large extent, based on repurposing existing natural gas pipelines. And the vision is that gas infrastructure could be progressively repurposed for the transportation of hydrogen, as over time, hydrogen will increase and will become most competitive, whereas the historical natural gas market will decrease. What we see here on the map, you see this European backbone as we envision it by 2040, and this dedicated network will develop in different phases. In a first step, we see that it will connect industrial clusters, so it will be very local, and progressively it will connect on a regional level and then national level, and lead to this interconnected European backbone. And maybe one last word to conclude this. I just wanted to share with you that we are already on our way to develop the first projects that will do the future European backbone. And for example, here in the northeast of France, we have we lead a project with a German gas transport operator to repurpose existing gas pipelines to the transport of hydrogen, and to connect electrolyzers sites to possible industrial consumers. So the ambition is to show it and to demonstrate that the repurposing is possible technically, and to contribute to the development of this first hydrogen cross-border valley. Thank you for your attention, and pleased to discuss that with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marion. Really interesting to see the vision and impressive that is set out for Europe's existing infrastructure as well as new infrastructure. I'm going to direct the first question to Erin. And there's a question from the audience about, you point to the importance of looking at existing infrastructure if we're going to take advantage of it and manage costs. But generally, this sounds like a transition is going to be expensive. How are we going to pay for it? And I think this question is focused here on the US. We can't hear you, Erin.
Sorry, thank you. So I think that it is a good question. That's one of the reasons that we're sort of presenting the option of, well, why don't we start by using existing infrastructure help us get there. And I think some of the things that we already see, which is, pipelines that are, or distribution lines that are put in place already are already using plastic pipe. And so it's not as though we're asked, this would require new technologies or significantly more, higher cost technologies to allow us to have more of the system be compatible with more hydrogen. So I think that that's one of the reasons we said, of all the solutions, there isn't really, if we're really going to get to net zero, and you can make, also an argument that there's a high cost for us not getting there, right? That's a huge cost to consumers to not focus on that. And so we have to weigh those costs as well. But this way we felt allows us to do a least cost solution with technology that already exists, with a system that already exists. And so in that way, you're right, somebody will pay, but it is, we felt, minimizing the costs involved to say, let's actually use this, something that's already in place as part of that tool.
So important. At GTI, when we look out to mid-century, and we envision these systems, we think they have to be low carbon and low cost. So the work that you're both doing here really helps begin to map out that low cost, with thinking about using what we have. I'll also, in answer to the audience question, say we're going to need disruptive innovation across the board to lower costs. So in order to make a difference for the planet and all of the people on it, we're going to have lower cost energy systems than we have now. So we need to leverage what we've got, and we've got to go be innovative about new solutions, technologies, and operational practices, as well as business models. So lots of change coming. So Marion, I'm going to direct this next question to you, and a version of it is going back to Erin. So there's some questions about colors of hydrogen, what the market's going to make on in Europe. Do you see, Marion, a role for blue hydrogen on the way to proving up the cost effectiveness of green hydrogen? Or do you think it's just a sole focus on those green molecules? Although at GTI, we like to focus on the carbon content rather than the color. We want to focus on the emissions rather than where we are in the rainbow of colors. Interesting in your perspective on what's going to be the source that Europe's most likely to rely on, and will carbon capture play a role in those near-term years before electrolysis proves up? And also, coincident with that, where's the market pull going to come from? Is it going to come from transportation and heavy industry? Is residential and commercial sectors going to play a role in these early years? Who are you looking for as the customer base that's really going to help get this started? And Erin, and after Marion answers, your perspective on the US is the US market going to make uniformly on one type of hydrogen? Are there going to be regional differences? If so, what's going to drive them in your view from your bird's eye seat right now as we get started on this great adventure? Marion, over to you.
Yeah, maybe regarding the color of hydrogen, in Europe, clearly the final target is to have a renewable hydrogen, so mainly based on renewable power and then electrolyzing to produce hydrogen. Nevertheless, in a transition phase, and to help scale up the market, the European Union objective see a clear role for blue hydrogen in this transition, and there are some projects to develop blue hydrogen production, especially around the North Sea, where carbon capture and sequestration chain could be put in place. So yes, there is a place for blue hydrogen and green hydrogen, even if the final target is more green hydrogen. Then regarding the final market, how the final market could develop. Clearly, the market will develop with first massive industrial final users, like I say, in in the steel sector, for petrochemical industry, etc. But in all the national strategies in Europe, we also see an important role for decarbonized hydrogen for heavy transport. So in the road mobility, but also for maritime mobility, etc. Because these are really hard to abate sector where it will be hard to have efficient electrified solutions. So in that is why the hydrogen solution plays an important role for this heavy mobility.
I can jump in now, Paula, if you'd like, on the US side. So I mean, we produce about 95% of the hydrogen we're producing right now in the United States is gray hydrogen. So there is, or higher. I mean, so there is a huge opportunity in our view to immediately make, one initial opportunity is how can you get as much of that to be carbon capture and turn into blue hydrogen. So there's an opportunity there. I mean, when we sort of look at the going forward in the future, obviously, green hydrogen is a great goal to have, but there are like everything, there are regional parts of our country that are certainly more are going to be lower cost for producing green hydrogen. If we're taking many parts of the US, what is powering the grid now, the emissions footprint of creating hydrogen would not be that green. So we sort of see, yes, there are opportunities in the US where there is a abundant of excess renewable power to create green hydrogen production, but there is a lot of opportunity, and we have to be realistic about the United States. And particularly, I think this is our key difference with Europe is we have abundant natural gas supply. We have an abundant cheap source of natural gas, and so blue hydrogen really needs to be part of a solution for the US. And certainly, if we think about how do we scale up hydrogen production generally, and we focus on the carbon, reducing carbon. And so I think we really don't see a path forward without blue hydrogen playing a pretty significant role. In terms of end use, I mean, obviously industrial end use is one key area. I think it's regional, right? And where is there regional compatibility to increase hydrogen in the system, whether that can be at a residential level, commercial level, industrial, but for us, the industrial sector definitely offers a key opportunity. And one way we could scale up is if we have massive government spending, like the Department of Defense could start saying, we want to start purchasing low carbon fuels. They could, there are opportunities to start seeing this scaled up by the type of buyers that are incentivizing this production as well.
Both of your remarks just really highlight a reminder for all of us that energy systems are already very multifaceted, that they will evolve based on geographies, our starting points, our local economies, resource bases. We'll pursue multiple technical and operational pathways to the future. So it's going to be very multifaceted. Sometimes we tend to get into conversations that are suggesting there is a way, right? And we're going to need lots of different pathways in different time periods where we rely on different approaches. Next question is for Erin. And as we think about incorporating hydrogen into the gas mix in US pipelines, how much of an obstacle do you see in existing transportation contract structures that specify the BTU content of natural gas? And will these have to be rewritten? Does that make it mission impossible? What are your thoughts?
Right, and so I definitely think it's a challenge. I know you probably have as much knowledge on this answer as I do, Paula, anybody, but I mean, I think you're absolutely right, because the BTU content of hydrogen is 1/3 that of natural gas. So we're definitely going to have to think about BTU deliverability, what that means, the usage. Another thing we think of is, if you're even blending in a small share of hydrogen, yes, it's a significantly more volume that you have to get through the system and deliverability. And I guess the question is, how I would say my expertise is not in how we should be rewriting those, how those contracts should be rewritten to sort of how do you specify a difference in changing it. But I definitely think, yes, we have to have an awareness that we're going to have a different BTU content of our gas. Although, as I said, it's going to take a while, right, for us to get to I think that being a really sizable concern.
Yeah, it would be a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
Signify that we've made some transition. And I'll just note on this that our current gas quality specs for pipelines in the US are pipeline specific. And there's sort of a box that gets drawn around a set of characteristics. So we're already starting with a great deal of geographic flexibility in the specifications of natural gas at any delivery point in the US. And one could expect we'll move from that starting point when we begin to think about hydrogen-rich gas, synthetic renewable gas streams, and others as we move along. So Marion, then this takes us to the next question for you. And how are pipeline gas quality specifications being handled for GRT gas as you think about hydrogen blending and how you're dealing with that with your customers? And then a second question that I'm going to roll in is, how are you addressing concerns about hydrogen embrittlement of the components of your pipeline? So how are you handling gas quality specifications with your customers? And what are your thoughts on concerns with regard to embrittlement?
Yeah, regarding the gas specification, in France, we in our gas specification there is a percentage of hydrogen that is allowed in for the gas specification. But now, as I showed in the slides, we have now several projects that intend to inject in the network, and these volumes could increase in the coming years. And so now we have to build the contractual and the regulatory framework with all the stakeholders to deal with this blending. And so in GRT Gas, we pilot some a kind of task force with all the different stakeholders, public authorities, producers, federation of final users, natural gas final users, etc., to really build together this new framework, contractual, technical, etc., that will allow to handle in security and correctly this question of blending gas, of blending hydrogen in the natural gas. And then regarding the embrittlement question, we really work closely with our R&D center to develop the technical solutions to mitigate the effect of hydrogen on the steel pipelines. So we have this R&D program, and we have more and more cooperation with other European gas transport operator on these technical aspects. So for example, we are developing some internal quoting solution to mitigate this effect, and then we are also working with other technical team on elaborating the future technical operating aspects of the pipeline, how to operate hydrogen pipeline and hydrogen pipeline repurposed to operate in security this future network. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think that we have to go step by step, and that is why we also now have this first project to help accelerate to build all this technical solution that will make the future hydrogen backbone.
So that's a good reminder, Marion, that we certainly want to be bold about our ambitions about energy transition, but then we also have to get to work on demonstrating how that can happen. And that's not just technological innovation, but operational practices, as you point out, and sorting out how all that's going to work together. And you and others are certainly leading the way in that regard. So we have some questions about how international trade might develop in hydrogen. And so I'm going to sort of give the question in two parts. One to Erin. Do you see, do you have views on international trade developing in hydrogen? And for example, do you have any views on the prospects of countries like Chile and Argentina that have incredible renewable resources, and in what that portends potentially for global hydrogen trade? And then after Erin answers, Marion, do you have a view on whether Europe will be importing hydrogen from some of these other producing areas, or you see Europe being self-sufficient in some regard? Erin?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting question, and I would say I'm a little bit cautious on how much of an international trade will develop, just because of what are the domestic priorities for these countries in terms of their own usage of of using, for example, in Chile, of using green hydrogen to displace their own natural gas imports, for example, in their own industrial sectors. So I do have a question over like the production and then transportation and getting sort of a hydrogen trade developing, and I don't want to rule it out as a possibility down the road. But for us, in terms of our immediate focus, is on how can each region or country be maximizing hydrogen production in its own path to get to net zero. And sort of there's so much work to be done on that first, that it's hard to then say we're going to see this really robust hydrogen trade developing, even in the next couple decades. So maybe I'm being too much of a naysayer, but that's sort of would be my initial view.
Marion?
Yeah, and maybe on the question of imports or the potential of production in Europe, there is a big potential for producing domestic hydrogen in Europe, and within the European Hydrogen Backbone Initiative, we made recent analysis on this potential production, and we had a publication last week about this. But the question is, there is also the question of the most competitive solution, and we also see that there is a big supply possibilities from neighboring countries to Europe, like North Africa or Ukraine and so on. And so the question is, what will be the most cost-effective solution? The question is quite open, but it could be quite competitive to produce hydrogen, decarbonized hydrogen, in countries with big solar potential, like south of Europe, Spain, or even North Africa, and to transport it. And when it is a transport via pipelines and existing gas pipelines that have been repurposed, and it's even more competitive. So maybe we will have a mix between domestic production and imports from neighboring countries, depending on the relative competitiveness.
Very interesting. There are a couple of audience questions about fuels, and I'm just going to defer that for another conversation, because I'd love to have us have a roundtable about the role of liquid fuels and biofuels, synthetic fuels, and energy transition. And then the whole set of questions that brings up about how are you going to get those liquid molecules where you need them, when you need them, in pipes. So good questions. I think we'll pivot to the final question for our panelists. There is a question from the audience that sort of asked the question of, we've been here before with people excited about hydrogen. What could go wrong to spoil these plans? But I think I'll turn that around a little bit and ask the two of you, in your final answer, what are you most optimistic about in the context of energy systems transition? What's something that you see as holding the potential to enable the bold outcomes that so many of us envision? And let's end on a high note. So who wants to go first?
I can. Yeah. All right.
Let's go, Erin.
I would say I think it's the way that we're starting to talk about what gives me real optimism is I feel as though there's a broadening of the approach or the path that we can get to net zero, and calling it net zero rather than 100% renewable. And I hear more discussion of the different sectors and the challenges for those sectors. So really thinking about this economy wide, and can we do this? Like, where does nuclear play a role in that? Where does CCS play a role in that? Where does hydrogen play a role in that? And sort of this, I think things have come back on the table that we walked away on, and this ties into the cycles of hydrogen, but we're actually looking at it thanks to our European colleagues like Marion as an economy-wide solution, not just a transportation fuel cell solution, but something that can be economy-wide. And I think the way that I'm hearing this discussion be framed now is giving me incredible optimism, because I think being selective over our past and our technologies is setting us up for failure. So the more we open up and broaden, as you said, we need all these technological breakthroughs. We need to be putting everything on the table to figure out how to get there. That's where my optimism lies.
Yeah, and maybe to complete, I'm quite optimistic, because what we see in Europe is that there is a political willingness at European level and national level in almost all European countries, and also at regional level. This is very important. And so there is this political willingness, and at the same time we see industrial stakeholders that are ready to do the project, to build the electrolyzers, scale up the market. And we also see the final consumers that are investigating all decarbonization solutions that they could put in place in their assets. So when we cross all this, I think that there is a momentum now, and so I'm quite optimistic. Yeah.
Well, I love that. I too share your optimism, and it's a really good reminder that the language we choose matters, and choosing language that allows us all to get on our toes and engage in this transition. And as Marion's noted, to get to work, to find some way that we can inquire, we can explore, we can work on demonstrating. So these are complex challenges and opportunities, and we've got to break them down to the bits that we can move forward. As we like to say at GTI, as we move towards these low cost, low carbon energy systems, ambition, innovation, and collaboration at scale are all required with a certain speed. So really pleased to see your organizations and your bright minds apply to this challenge. Thank you for making the time to be with us here today, particularly Marion, as this is the end of day your time, and I know your family's waiting for you. So thank you for prioritizing this today. Very much appreciate it. Thanks to all in our audience for being here, and for those who I know will be watching this later, as is the IAEE custom. And now, Dave, back over to you.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Marion and Erin as well. Wow, I share your optimism for sure. And you know, this ever changing landscape that we're all going to be embracing with energy transition, this is the time to be really talking about these timely issues. So we're very grateful for your time and your expertise. Wish you a good evening, a good day, a good afternoon, where this finds you on our fine globe. Thank you especially as well to GTI for co-sponsoring this webinar with IAEE today. Take care.